Let's create a pivotal impact. So friends in the industry. So one thing I really have to say is one of the best parts of the transportation industry is the ability to create opportunities for yourself without being limited by technicalities like degrees and thises and that's. So for this reason and many others, I always encourage professionals to get involved in the transportation industry as it continues to be proven where you start in the industry is not actually where you need to stay. So the opportunity to make a really good living to support yourself and your family is definitely there, but also to complete services that you can be proud of. And that honestly truly does exist in the transportation industry. So I'm Josh Hannaberry, your host here at the Truck Focus podcast. If this is the first time you've ever checked out the Truck Focus podcast, I really welcome you to our community. To our dedicated listeners, I just want to continue to say thank you so much for your continued investment of time. Make sure that you like this episode and share it out, as I'm super excited to introduce our guest. So in today's episode, I'm excited to speak with Dallas Duncan, Director of Business Development at Pioneer Safety Solutions. So during our conversation, Dallas takes us through a deep dive of his experience in the transportation and oil and gas industries and does an incredible job discussing the current state of Class 1 driver training in Alberta, known as MELT, but also discloses what he and the team at Pioneer Safety Solutions are doing to help improve the training experience, not only for professional drivers, but also for carriers. So I encourage you to connect with Dallas directly on LinkedIn. Visit the website pioneersafetysolutions.com. I've also included all of the contact details just in the show notes below. So it's super easy for you to reach out at any point during or after the episode. So I look forward to the impact this conversation is going to have. Let's get to it. Dallas, welcome to the Truck Focus podcast. Super excited for our conversation today for a couple of reasons. First off, I really admire you as a professional. I'm in our first conversation and what I've just continued to see online and between our mutual, I'd say, professional friendships. Two things really stand out. One is you're a huge advocate for professional drivers, but you're also a huge advocate for safety and culture. And those are two things really close to my heart. And they really feed the mission that we're doing here at the Truck Focus podcast. So super excited that we get to dive through, first off, obviously, who is Dallas? But then we get to talk about what you really care about. We get to get jacked in this space. And yeah, I'm really excited just to see where the conversation goes. So welcome.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate being here and I appreciate the opportunity to get to speak about what I love. So it's really awesome to be here.
Awesome. So no, I'm grateful very much. So to start us off, kind of give us a rundown. Who is Dallas? And give us some backstory on your experience, not just transportation, but also oil and gas sectors.
Well, I'm been in the sector, in the oil and gas sector for like 25 years ish. Probably a good portion of that. Almost half of that is actually in the training side of things. Grew up Southeast Saskatchewan. Dad's a truck driver. He's been with the same company for 45 years and he's manages a company and owns his own trucks. And my grandfather he was in the oil and gas sector. So I learned early on how to run dozers and loaders and all that kind of equipment. So my family is oil and gas based, and I've grown up like right straight through from a little kid to an adult knowing oil and gas. So the trucking side of it came early on when I decided that I didn't really decide. It was just more like this is where I was headed because things weren't working out. I wasn't the sharpest pencil in the case when it came to school work. So I kind of focused on what came easy to me. So trucking just seemed to be a natural fit. So I learned that from an early age. So
nice. So that's really cool. So props to your dad, obviously, props to your grandfather, obviously. Like that's incredible because of the bloodline. And you highlighted something that I think really needs to be spotlighted in our industry is opportunity. Because you mentioned multiple pieces of equipment. You obviously mentioned trucks, there's trailers, like there's so many components. And then the fact that you've been heavily involved in the training space, like that's 6 careers right there. And I think far too often people don't give the industries like oil and gas sectors, transportation, logistics, they don't really see it from the opportunity lens. I think they often see it as, well, I don't want to do that. It's like, well, you can start here and navigate here. And yeah, I think that the fact that that's your bloodline is really cool too, because it's true to our industry and it's going to keep propelling people to come to the industry because you have so many stories that you can lean on to say, actually, I have been in this situation, or my dad's been in this situation, or he's still in, like, I think that's really powerful. And I'm glad you really give a good overview of, okay, what is your experience? Because far too often, like I said, people don't appreciate that because it's the industry. It's like, no, there's a lot here. So anyway, I get super excited when when there's history. So
Absolutely.
hey, Josh here. Just a quick interruption for our episode, as I wanted to ask a question. So do you have any ongoing job postings that you need filled, but just are not getting enough traction? So I encourage you to contact us today to discuss how we can bring exposure and candidates to your job postings. Let's get back to the episode. That's awesome. What part of your journey then did you switch to the training space, so commercial driver training per se?
So I worked for a company for my dad. The company my dad works for, I worked for them for 9 years, hauling crude oil down in southeast Saskatchewan. And I ended up getting divorced, and I came out to Medicine Hat for a Thanksgiving weekend, and I never went home. Essentially phoned Dad and said, I'm done. I have to leave. This is a good opportunity for me. So when I went to work for Schlumberger, that was sort of like the real drive for training. So I left a company where I was handed a set of keys. I knew it, because of my background of growing up riding around with my dad forever, I knew how to do that job. And so it was an easy, here's the keys, go to work kind of thing when I got my license. But what I didn't really know was I didn't know sort of how to drive truck. I watched my dad. I learned everything I know from my dad, but my dad is an amazing truck driver. But my dad is a guy that, he got his chauffeur's license. And in 1981, they said, oh, no, you have to have a class 1A. So then my dad, to get his class 1A, he had to take a piece of equipment that was a manual transmission. So my dad got his class 1A in a 5-speed Buick Skylark. Okay. So what I had to learn was you have to, and this is how my dad taught me, you have to double clutch this truck. And I said, okay, how come? And he said, because they said so. And I said, well, who's they? Well, the guy that's going to examine you says you have to do this. So I would do it, and he'd say, okay, you didn't do that right. And I'd say, okay, well, how come? And he says, well, you just didn't do it right. So there was a real disconnect for the training for me, because I was I need to know why I'm doing something kind of, to make it make sense to me. So I learned the hard way for everything. Like, I was the guy that was always in the ditch. I was the guy that was stuck. I was the guy that didn't pay attention. I didn't know why I was always stuck, because I was always driving too fast. I didn't know what I didn't really know. I just knew that I knew how to shift gears, but it never really taught me why I was shifting gears, right? So then fast forward 10 years, I end up working for Schlumberger, and I come to work for them, and they paid me this crazy amount of money to come to work for them. And I was like, oh, really? And they're like, yeah. And then they said, well, you can't drive our trucks though, because you have to go to school. So I was like, okay. And that was where I got to ride around for 2 weeks with these guys who were equipment operators, not truck drivers. And I'm not allowed to drive the truck. But these guys, a lot of them really didn't know how to drive the truck either. So I was teaching people as soon as I started with them about shifting gears and why they're shifting gears, and then, but I'm not allowed to drive it because I haven't been to their school yet, right? So 2 weeks later, I get to go to school, and then I sit in a classroom, and they're teaching me why I'm double clutching, and they're teaching me what's actually happening in that transmission, and they spent this time, and it was like a light bulb for me went on in my head, because it was like, this is amazing, because now I can take those things and I can put them towards teaching other people why they need to do a certain thing when they're in the truck. And that included everything, like their equipment training that I had there. I would get on a piece of equipment and be told how to run it, but I had no idea why I was running it or what was actually happening. And I didn't do a very good job of it until somebody sat me down and actually drew a picture and said, this is the thing that you're running. This is how it works. Follow the lines on here. And then it went, oh my gosh, this is brilliant. And then I became a really good equipment operator for that particular piece of equipment, right? So I kind of tried, like, that's me. That's how I work, right? So then I had a lot of patience. So when I got back in the seat to drive, then you get to spend a bunch of months driving a truck for those guys. Then you get to get signed off to actually drive a truck by yourself. So I really thought, like, this is absolutely brilliant that we would take guys and we would actually mentor them. And then we would keep an eye on a guy that's new before we let him go out into the world. So for a guy that had 10 years experience, it was sort of like at first it was kind of a kick because you were like not allowed to go drive a truck by yourself. But then they took that time to actually put you in those positions to make you successful, right? But in that position, a lot of those guys are really truly are. They're equipment operators. They're not driving the miles that I drove. So they aren't actually truck drivers, right? So and then as soon as as soon as I was able to under their standards, they sent me back to school to become an instructor. And that's where I started to learn about actually teaching people. And I think, that just sort of was, for me, that was my university. I didn't get to go to university because I wasn't smart enough to go to university. So for me, this was my education, my training, my background, right? So
Yes.
it just made sense for me from that perspective. And so I worked in the field but for the next, 12 to 15 years, I spent a lot of that time in the training industries for different companies, teaching people about driving the trucks. So
Powerful, man. So I love the why factor. And I think that's something in any type of industry that if it's operating an excavator and you're digging, so you're doing pipeline work or you're doing something in municipalities, if you're hauling like a dump truck for landscaping company, the heavy haul, like understanding that you can do things really, really hard and you're kind of getting it done, or there is an easier way. I think identifying those two obstacles. And once you understand the why, like clarity creates purpose. And when you have a clear understanding of, okay, this is why I'm double clutching, or this is why my RPMs need to be here, or this is why I don't want to idle my truck. Those start for yourself as a professional, you can start owning that space. And then that's when you, like said, they drove truck, but they weren't truck drivers. They were equipment operators. That's very true. And I think, teaching the why is a big part where I think a lot of I would no diss the carriers, but transportation carriers, they miss that part of the boat. They think you have a class 1 license or whatever, you must be able to do this. It's like, not necessarily. So it's nice, like you said, right? They invested into you. And so was that for yourself? Like, can you describe, we don't have to be too touchy-feely when we're talking feelings, but I remember the first time I was trained, like someone actually put me into a training orientation program. I remember that feeling because to me, I'm like, you're investing money into me to get good at something. Holy F, like that was amazing. So for yourself, I didn't go to university as well. So I'm still actually at U of A, but that's relevant. When you're in that moment, what was it like for yourself to say, wow, someone's actually investing energy, time, money, resources, and patience for me to get good at something? What was that feeling like for you?
Well, it's a real almost euphoric feeling, right? Because I came from a background of, like, I grew up with my dad's company. Like, my dad's been there. I'm 46. He's 45 years with that company. So the company is what I knew, right? But a long time ago, it was filling seats for them. They still don't have the training that we do in a lot of cases, right? So it's just, you were given a set of keys, you were told to go drive a truck, and then when you'd have a problem, well, why did you have that problem? Like, I can remember one of my first trucks I drove was a 1981 Western Star. It had a 15-speed transmission, which is still to this day my favorite transmission. It went 100 miles an hour, that truck. I drove it as fast as that truck would go because I was paid commission, which meant the faster I drove, the more I got done, the more I put in my pocket. I was also 18, so the front part of my brain had not finished developing, right? So the things that are dangerous and stupid didn't equate in my head yet, right? So, but I would wreck. I tore up rear ends in that truck. In 1997, Southeast Saskatchewan had snow. The ditches were full. There was snow everywhere. And the operators would call and they'd say, "Hey, is Dallas working today?" And they'd say, "Yeah, Dallas is working. Can you send him out, have a look? If he thinks he can get in there. If he can't, we'll call a plow." I would get in there and I would wreck a truck. And then at the end of the day, the boss would come down from wherever he was living at the time, and you knew you were in trouble because his glasses would be hanging off the end of his nose, and he would look over top of them and he would proceed to give you heck about wrecking his truck. And I didn't get it. I learned how to drive truck from a guy that wasn't driving in those conditions. My dad was the dispatcher, the coordinator, and the manager from a truck. He wasn't driving in 3 feet of snow. He was driving and hauling oil into locations that were plowed out because he had to be on the telephone and the radio and writing in a book while he's driving. I didn't learn that. So when a mechanic finally said to me, "Why don't you lock your differentials up?" What's the differential? Well, it's the switch on the dash. If you put that in before you start spinning your wheels, you'll stop wrecking your ends. I had no idea because my dad never drove in places that we were throwing the diff locks in to have to get in and out of. So I didn't see the diff locks used, right? So it's just, it's those things for me. Like when I finally got sat down and said, "This is what a diff lock does. This is what an inner axle does. This is what, this is your quad lock. This is how they work. This is how they function." And then I went, "Oh my gosh, like these guys are investing in me." Like, so for me at 11, right into probably my 11th year of driving truck was when I finally went, wow, like I'm like, they put the time in, they put the effort in, and I'm now like, I'm going to take what I know and I want to share that with that 18-year-old Dallas. I want him to know, like, I believe that's what makes me a really good driver instructor. Part of it is I get along really well with most people. The other thing is I've done the stupid things in a truck that you don't have to do anymore because I'm going to tell you what's going to happen when you do it. Yes. I should have rolled more trucks than that company owned because of how I drove. I tell my dad stories of what I did in a truck when I was 18, and he just shakes his head and thinks, "Oh my gosh, like I am like," the only reason I ever had a job as long as I did was because my dad was the guy running the place.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just, so for me, it was like this, it just was an enlightening. It was like when I phoned home and said to my dad, "Hey, I'm becoming a driving instructor." Like my dad, I don't think has ever been more proud of me at any moment in time. Like my dad loves telling people, "Oh, my son's a driving instructor. My son is a air brake instructor," right? Like it's like, and then I go home and I drove truck for my dad last summer just to give him a hand down there. And I said to him, like, "I can't do the crazy stuff anymore. Like I'm a licensed driving instructor." So I said, I have to do this legit, just so you know. So there's no over houring me. There's no, I can't be speeding. I can't be doing stupid stuff. So just so you're aware, I'm not going to be like the rest of these guys. It's got to be legit. And he's like, "Yeah, no, I get that from you." So, like it's empowering to me, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. You defined what I say as a pivotal moment or a pivotal impact where you were able to say, "Okay, what I've learned now, if I could teach that to my 18-year-old self, the change that I would have made back then." So that change based off of advice, I call that like creating a pivotal impact and listening to you, but I can also see you. So those that are listening, hop on YouTube and check this out. Cause like, I call that a passion moment where I'm like, go, because you're like, "This matters. This is this. They taught me why." Like all of those emotions really, really do drive change, and they shift cultures in organizations because they shift cultures in us as people. And I think far too often we forget about that. We forget you and I are human and we have emotional needs. And when someone invests into you and you're kind of like, "Oh, I can still do my job. I can still rock out, but I can do it in this way." They're breaking stuff and getting yelled at. Great. Like, yeah. So you unraveled a lot there, but also hearing the pride that your dad has in your profession, I think is also a huge highlight because I don't think very many people experience that at all in life, but to know like, okay, I'm doing things right. I'm doing things I love, I care about, and my family's proud of me and they have my back. I also think that's really cool. So I'm really happy for you there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So no, absolutely. And you hit on what I was going to ask next is, I guess, the reason, like, what is the reason for being a driver trainer? But you really hit that home. So I'm just, yeah, I'm really honestly, I'm grateful for your honesty too, because a lot of what you shared, you didn't have to. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be able to share that.
So with your years of experience in training, and obviously we're in Alberta, so we've integrated melt. What would you say has been the hardest obstacle that you've had to overcome converting from being a driver training to being a melt driver trainer?
So the melt program, um, it's sort of it's kind of a tough subject because the hardest obstacle with melt is the amount of money that people have to spend on it. It's extremely expensive. The problem with that side of it is everybody thinks, oh, you're making $10,000 per student. Well, yeah, but if you break down the hours I now have to spend with you because I'm mandated to spend a certain amount of hours, that truck's only working for $88 an hour. So there's, when I phoned my dad and we have these discussions, and I said to him, like, hey, from a trucking perspective, what's a truck for you earning per hour? And they're making $125 an hour. So I could take these two trucks that I have training with, and I could make more money hauling oil with them than I can training students, right? With less wear and tear on the truck because I'm not training brand new people all the time, right? So that part of it is an issue. The other part of it is that's mandated by the government. I can't charge more than that. Therefore, now that the price of fuel has gone up by exponential amount, I can't make that up. I can't actually charge extra for that. The other problem we have with a couple of things with the MELT program, the government has a return to work program. Great program. I can't offer it because they only give you $8,800 to run that program. So if I take a student for $8,800, I'm already losing money, and I can't take a student for $10,000 because I don't have the ability to actually do that, right? So that's another issue with MELT. The training side of it, what I like about MELT is every single student is required to spend, they get 72 and a half hours of training in the truck. So that's all broken down. They get 39 hours of actual driving the truck. Okay, so that's about 19 hours more than the average student in Alberta was given to get a Class 1 license before. So I do get to spend more time with students in the truck. The part that I don't like about the MELT program is that we were given a program that was written by a Class 5 driver from Ontario who was hired by the Ontario government to write a program. So he did.
Just a quick shout out to our friends at Pioneer Safety Solutions as they've launched their new website, SuperJack. So what you got to do is go to pioneersafetysolutions.com, hit enter or go, depending on your device. And obviously the first thing that you see is Pioneer Safety Solutions. We craft customized safety solutions, so suited to each client, which I think is super incredible. So as I said, SuperJack just on the launch of their new website, super proud of them as an organization and the impact that they're having in our industry. And just also, I'm really proud of them for being ELD certified here in Canada. So again, pioneersafetysolutions.com.
The information that we have in there, a lot of it isn't correct information. They had a lot of mistakes, a lot of pictures that weren't proper pictures. There was a lot of issues initially when we first got it. A few of them have been corrected. But there's a lot of stuff, like I'm taking a guy that's 18 years old for sure, because he has to be to get a commercial license. So he drove a car or a pickup truck out to my facility to train in, right? But I have to spend an hour and a half teaching them about all of those things in the truck: the gas pedal, the clutch, the steering wheel, the gear shift, all the buttons on the dash. All the things that guy should already know. I'm mandated to spend an hour and a half with them, people, teaching them that. So there's a lot of disconnect. The 40 and a half hours of classroom instruction, I believe there's a few things in that 40 and a half hours that have to be taught. Hours of service, huge. we need to be teaching, we should be teaching cargo securement. We should be doing more than just teaching a paper book cargo securement. It should be a hands-on component to that, which they don't do. Teaching components about the truck, like it's drives me a little bit on the nutty side, because as a truck driver, I was not a mechanic. I really didn't need to know what my alternator was, or what my air conditioner pump was, or why do I need to know that it's called a crown nut and a cotter key? As long as it's secured to the truck and not falling off, then I should be good to go, right? But we have to teach specific things to the examiners, what they're looking for now. And a lot of it is sort of, it gets lost in translation because guys don't really care. They just want to get a license and get out of there. They're not working on the trucks. A lot of these companies, you're not allowed to work on your trucks anymore. So why do they need to know these so specific of things that we have to teach, right? And that's a portion of the classroom that you actually spend talking. And a lot of it is like, I'm getting these kids that are farm kids. I'm getting the Hutterites. I'm getting the Mexican Mennonite kids. These guys have been driving truck already. The only reason they're coming now is because the government's starting to breathe down their neck that they need to be licensed and driving properly, right? So a lot of these guys are already coming with good knowledge. And I don't have the ability to say, well, this guy's actually pretty good, so I'm going to cut that part out. Or, when it comes to the actual, so the driving, the 39 hours of driving, there's 12 hours of backing up. We have to do 2 backups. In 25 years, I've never, ever parallel parked a truck ever in my life. Okay. I'm not saying that you won't come across that somewhere, but we have to do that on a road test, right? A blindside 90. I'm from Saskatchewan. We didn't teach blindside 90s in Saskatchewan for a road test. We taught a 3-point turn or a 2-point turn or whatever they called it, where you went around the corner, backed across the road and went back the same direction you came out of, right? So I never learned a blindside 90 until I started training in Alberta. That's required by our government standards to actually pass a road test. So 12 hours of that is backing up. Some of these guys can back up a truck already. We have 6 hours of unhooking and hooking up a truck. I don't know anybody that can't learn that in the first 20 minutes and know it, but I have to spend 6 hours. I'm not allowed to deviate from that. I have to teach that. So what I would like is for the government to recognize that I'm the professional. My colleagues are the professionals. So why can't I say, these are what we need to have in the program. This is where we should be teaching it. Now, on the driving side of it, I teach guys to get their license. I don't ever go into it teaching a guy to become a truck driver, because that takes years and years of experience. That takes mentorship. So I've had one customer who I'm going to run a whole entire program for his business this summer. And he was mad because I don't teach right. And I said, oh, okay. And he's like, I'm taking these guys and I'm putting them in a set of B trains as soon as they come out. And I said, cool. I'm not teaching them how to drive a B train. I'm teaching them to get a road test passed in Medicine Hat. So essentially, I'm teaching them how to deliver bread around Medicine Hat. I don't need them to be high RPM shifting. I need them using their brakes because they can't use an engine brake on a road test. So therefore, I said, I can teach them what you want for your guys, particular after the fact, but they still have to pass a road test. And I'm the professional, not you. So I would like the government to actually give me the ability to say, okay, this guy, he can drive. He only needs this. I don't mind having, like, if it's the 39 hours of driving, great. Like, let's keep those hours, but let me decide. If the guy doesn't need 12 hours of backing up, but he can't shift gears, let me take 6 of those hours from backing up and put him on shifting gears, right? The 6 hours of coupling and uncoupling, let me take that and give those hours somewhere else where they're actually needed. The 40 and a half hours of classroom, let's get rid of the stuff that's the fluff that you're going to learn when you're sitting in that truck anyways. And let's do the things that truck drivers need to know how to do. Like, how about learning logbooks? How about spending, like, we get to spend about 4 hours on logbooks. That's it. And a lot of these guys have never run a logbook before, and that's not enough time. We don't get to spend enough time teaching And I found this out after the fact because one of my students phoned me up after and said, "Hey, I'm now trucking on the highway. You need to talk about permits." And I was like, "Oh, like what do I need to talk about? Because I've never trucked into the United States, so I don't know what you need for a permit." And he says, "Well, yeah, and you got to read these permits because all the stuff that's in that permit, you can't go around what's in there. You have to know what's in there." And I'm like, "Oh, good point." So he's actually getting me permits that he's used so that I can actually explain to students, this is what you're going to come across. I want to build a program, right? I want to develop it so that it's a meaningful program. So when guys leave, they have enough tools in their toolbox that they're going to be successful. But I also believe that we have done this the wrong way. I think, like, I got my class 1 at 18. I never drove a class 1 truck. I drove a class 3 truck for years. Then I moved up into a class 1 truck, and then I moved up into a bigger class 1 truck, and it was years before I drove a set of B trains. And I think that that's the way it should be done. I think it should be more, I would like it to become an apprenticeship program, right? I would like to be able to have, you know, if someone's hiring and one guy walks in with 25 years experience and the other guy walks in with 20 minutes experience, they both get paid the same rate, differentiate that so that guys can actually make a living at it and be proud of the career that they've chosen, right? But start them out in a smaller vehicle and say, okay, for 6 months, you have to drive a class 3 vehicle. Then you're going to come back in. We do graduated road test licenses for class 5. Why don't we do that for class 1? Like, I don't think we're setting guys up for success when we train them at a school like mine, and then they walk out into the world and they can drive a loaded set of Super Bs across the Coca-Cola in a week. So that's not success to me, right?
Yes.
So I would like those things to be given back to us as instructors to say, this is a program that we should have. I'm not opposed to a mandatory, you have to take this stuff, but I think we need to revamp what's in that 40 and a half hours of actual classroom. The time training, the 72 and a half hours, I'm all for that. I would like 100 hours, but I would like it to be where I want it so that they can actually learn what they need to learn, right?
Yes.
Chain up, we don't teach chains. That was one thing I heard on a conference call with the transportation minister when I got to sit in and listen, and trucking companies were like, well, we hired this guy and he didn't know how to put a set of chains on. And the transportation minister passed it off to one of her colleagues. And he said, oh, this is the most intensive program we've ever had. It's a great program. I emailed them and I said, do you guys realize that there isn't a chain up portion in MELT? We don't teach chains at all. I'm not required to even. So how does, I never knew how to chain up a truck when I moved to Alberta. But everybody assumed because I drove truck for 10 years, I would know how to put a set of chains on. But Southeast Saskatchewan, when you got stuck, it's flat. So you call a farmer with a 4-wheel drive tractor and he pulls you around location. I move out to Alberta and just they assumed, and because of human nature, right? They're all saying, oh, you're the greatest truck driver we got because you've got the most experience. And it wasn't until I end up way up north of Fort St. John up in the sticks and I'm stuck on the side of a hill, spun out because I don't know how to put a set of chains on. Right. So it was a very humbling experience for me, but we didn't, even back then at Schlumberger, we didn't take the time to really teach people how to chain up a truck. And we didn't use them lots, especially in our area here in Medicine Hat. We're in a zero disturbance, so they didn't use chains. And so we got used to not actually putting chains on, right? So it's things like that that need to be introduced in that are going to make more well-rounded truck drivers.
Yes.
The training itself, like I said, we're extremely successful with what we do here for getting people licenses, but we need those companies. They have to step up on the mentorship side of things, and that's where oil and gas, that's a big difference between trucking on the highway, because you had to be mentored by somebody else and signed off, and they have in-house driver trainers and people that make sure that you can actually do what they need you to do before they send you out in a truck. But on the highway, you might get one trip with a guy, depending on the company you work for. You might spend some time with somebody, But some companies, it's here's your truck, here's your keys, there's your load, and away you go, right? So
Yes.
that's not success.
Correct. Yeah, man, you unraveled so many things there. I'm really glad you did, because you're an expert in this space. And that was probably the most honest and clear breakdown of the melt training that I've heard. And I've been in a number of conversations from the education standpoint with melt. But some things that you said, it's like, man, that's so true. Because I think if you were to put people in buckets, and if you have 20 years driving experience, but it's always been in an automatic, just as an example, and you know you're going to go from flat deck to dry van, or dry van to flat deck, or whatever, you're now in that position where it's like, okay, well, let's train you specific things. So that way, yeah, I'm going to make you a better operator, a safer operator, but also a better employer owner operator. And I think that part I completely aligned with, where it's like, okay, this is kind of our new baseline, but we need to now mold it for industry and not just mold it to pass the test, like you said. And I think, so when you're talking to people and they're challenging you, and it's like, but you're challenging, I can just put myself in that position and being like, okay, you're challenging me from your perspective, but not reality. And I think you did a really good job explaining, well, this is what we're actually training for. And I like, because I wanted to go there next too, was what can you do as an addition? Because again, you're expert in training, you have 25 years experience. There's so many things up here. And I know in our initial call, you were kind of highlighting some stuff that you're doing, and you mentioned it briefly in this conversation, where it's like, okay, there is opportunity for so much more. Where, okay, let's get you past your road test, sure. But that's just a checkbox. Now let's get you into cargo securement with straps and chains and boomers. And this is how you actually complete a logbook, or what you do if there's a malfunction. Like, so there's a lot of those type of things. But yeah, I think that that's really important. But before we go into the next phase of your training, I need to ask the question, do you believe that melt is creating safer drivers?
No, I don't. And I don't, because at the end of the day, what we have from melt is a bunch of classroom that nobody pays any attention to. And I think we have guys that have a better opportunity to drive safer, but you still have to stop at a stop sign when there's a stop sign. And that's never changed. The biggest change that I have, so as an instructor before, someone would come to us, and I worked specifically at that point in time. I was with service companies, oil field companies, right? We trained our own drivers. When I trained my own drivers that already worked for us, the company was already paying them. So it didn't matter if they were in the field or they were with me. I had a litmus test, and that was on our drives. If I said, okay, my family is standing on that corner right now. When you're going around that corner, is my family safe? If at any point in time I said, nope, they're not safe yet, you weren't ready for a road test. So it was up to me to decide when those guys were actually able to go for a road test. If I said no, then they didn't get to go for a road test, okay? As a private company training students, they focused on getting guys in and getting guys out. So I took people that were trained at schools that got their license, that focused on the driver's trainer's route, right? The examiner's route. So these guys would come and they would know how to shift gears at certain points along the way, because that was reference points that they were using. As soon as you went backwards through that route, they could not shift gears, and you had to spend time training them. So you might have had somewhere between, and the lowest that I know of personally in this area was 6 hours of training before they were able to road test. When I got them, I spent another 30 hours with them before I even would allow them to drive our trucks, and they already had a license. So to me, I liked it that way before, where I could decide. And it was somewhere between 20 and 30 hours, which we're now at 39 hours of straight driving. So I'm not even off the mark of what I used to actually do by much, right? I'm only, a few hours higher now than I used to do for people, right? So I've always trained with the intention of helping a person become a better driver, teaching them the right way to do things so that they have that base to go on. And it doesn't matter what truck you jump into or what company you go to work for. If you follow those things that I taught you, you should be able to be successful, right? And but it allowed me to have control of whether or not they were ready or not ready. And some guys are never ready. There's some guys that come that, as crappy as it is, and back in the old days, it wasn't it was still a lot of money, but it wasn't a whole lot of money when you look at the grand scheme of things. If they weren't able to do it, they weren't able to do it. But now when they pay $10,000 to come to your training course, whether you think they're ready or not, as soon as those hours are completed, they're eligible to go for a road test. And they may not be ready for that road test, but we're still getting guys through a license. And I encourage those guys that are on the cusp of maybe should take up a different career. I encourage those guys to go to work for companies like the Bisons that have an actual training program where they can sit in a truck for 6 weeks or 9 weeks with somebody who's going to teach them what they need to know from that perspective, right? But I don't have any control once they leave and they pass. And let's be honest, our road test in Medicine Hat it's not like the hardest thing to do. I mean, there's only so many places they can take you, right? And they take you in the hardest parts that we can, but it still is a 15-minute drive. It's only, it doesn't take long to get through a road test, so, but you do your best to get guys prepared as best that they can be. And it's completely rewarding when you drive down the road and you see trucks leaving town and they're hauling out a $1 million fluid pump or whatever, the case is, and they're guys that you trained, right? And it's for me, that's why I do it. It's the gratification of having those guys be successful. And, years later, you look back and you think, yeah, I trained that guy when he went by. So.
Agreed completely. And I appreciate your expertise in this space, because a lot of the real world you're living, I don't think is up for display per se. And I really appreciate the fact that we're able to take this opportunity to go to that depth, because it's real. This is what we're up against. This is what industry's up against. This is what society, when you're driving next to these new drivers, are up against. So that's a really clear answer, and I appreciate that. So we mentioned prior, and we'll go into it right now, but you talked about doing some additional training. So it's creating your own program. And I know that we collectively work really close and with Pioneer Safety Solutions. So shout out to the team. So if I'm a listener right now to our audience and I'm a carrier and I'm saying, I just don't feel like my fleet is safe enough, I don't feel like they're understanding enough, what would the training, or what could that training program look like? Because I'm assuming it's customizable for that operation. But can you walk us through, like, what does that offering look like? Because I really want to get that out there too.
Well, what I would do, like through Pioneer, is we're in the process of kind of revamping a couple of programs that are out there. But for certain things like oil and gas sector, right, they have to have, if they run the oil field exemption permit, they have to have training in hours of service, fatigue management, cargo securement. They also have to have a defensive driving course, which is an ODA or equivalency of that. Now, ODA is the only place you can get that is through an Energy Safety Canada provider. The other three can be taught, and you can actually develop your own in-house programs. But like what I feel I think there's a lot of value and a lot of room for it is there's a lot of trucking companies now. What I have found in the past is a lot of places that I've worked, the people that are educated, and it doesn't matter what their education is and what their background is, those are the guys that end up running divisions. Those are the guys that get into areas that they're transport managers. They're the guys that are running the safety programs. And the safety guys, I know they go through a lot of safety courses, but it doesn't mean they ever drove a truck. It doesn't mean that they know that end of it, okay? So I find that a lot of those kinds of divisions, they end up with programs that either are not relevant, they're not getting their point across because people aren't buying what they're selling, right? So where I see it and where I would like it to go for us at Pioneers, I would like to be able to go to those companies, and the small ones especially, right? The ones that don't have the money to have someone on full time, perhaps they do, but they're just not qualified, not really sure where they need to go. I want to be able to direct them. So cargo securement courses, let's build you a cargo securement course, because cargo securement, the standard NSC standard 10 is cargo securement. It's a program that the government has in place that nobody is actually required to take unless you need the oil field exemption permit. But it's so general in what it teaches, and it's bare minimums and nothing that we do out there. Like, I would never ever secure a load the way that the cargo securement standard says to secure a load, because it's not enough, right? For me personally, it's not enough. I wouldn't get caught with 2 straps on something that I think should have 4 straps on it, right? And legally I can get away with 2. So I would like programs, I would like to be able to sit down and say to these companies, what do you need? Where are your struggles? How can we help you fix those struggles? So if it's a cargo securement, let's build you a cargo securement program that's specific to your company. Like, if you're flat deck, it's different than a guy that's transporting sand or cement or crude oil, right? So let's build you those specific programs to that. Fatigue management is another program that I believe should be taught, and it's just awareness for drivers. It's the thinking about the things that you don't think about, right? We've been really awful in the trucking industry for promoting fitness. We're now starting to see fitness programs on LinkedIn. You're watching guys get out of the truck with their rubber bands and do their exercises, right? We've been terrible at that. Truckers have been famous for the big trucker guts because they eat poor food, they don't get exercise, right? So we need to promote that. Fatigue management plays into that. So teach people about fatigue management and what to look for so that they can understand where, they could possibly have problems. Hours of service. To me, I know we're going electronic. That's part of Pioneer, is running ELDs. To me, an ELD is like, it's a no-brainer. So for these companies that are like on the fence and it's this, it's that, it's Big Brother, to me, these are a conscience for the truck. If you are doing something in that truck that you shouldn't be doing, then it should be able to tell you you're doing it, and you should be able to stop it, right? So I don't think of these ELDs as Big Brother. I think of them as an actual conscience for my truck. If I've ever been in a truck doing something inappropriate, someone ought to know about it, and I shouldn't be driving that truck anymore if that's the case, right? So that's the way I feel about the ELD side of it. But hours of service, you still need to know hours of service. Even if you're running an ELD, you need to know what is going on. You need to know how many hours, why do I only have this many hours left? What did I do wrong here, right? Even if you're logging it on an electronic book, if you fail to understand and you've logged in when you shouldn't have logged in, or whatever the case is, you should understand that. And if the ELD goes down, you still should know how to fill out a paper logbook so you can get to where you're going, so that you can get it sorted out, right?
Yes. Yes.
And to me, it's huge, and we don't use that enough. And I think that even those local guys running provincially don't have to have an ELD yet. But I just like teach these guys how to run a logbook. I said I worked for my dad last summer. I went down there. It was really funny because the safety guy there, I've known him my whole entire life. I grew up with his kids, and we sat down, and he's like, well, I guess I got to teach you hours of service. And I said, I probably just could write your test. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, well, I teach hours of service, and I know you don't because you've never run a logbook. So I'll just take the test if you got one. So he's like, yeah, I guess, right? So it's just funny how, these things that even the small companies have now that they have to teach people, but they have people teaching it that don't really know how to run a logbook. They've never ran a logbook. So how is he supposed to understand when you have an issue or a question with it? How does he know?
Yes.
So I want to be able to take these programs to companies, and I want to be able to offer them, and I want to be able to sit down with them and say, like, I'll come in and I can be a guy that comes in on a blip and teach a course. You pay me what I need to get paid to get in there, and I'm out. And when you have problems, you phone up Dallas and say, hey, I got a bunch of new guys. I'm having problems with this. Can you come back in? And I go back in and I teach those guys again. And we don't have to be that, that safety department. Like, we were always, as trainers, we were always the first guys run off. You were always the first guy laid off because we were seen as non-revenue generating people. We just cost the companies money. And every 5 years they lay you off, and then 3 years later they're trying to hire everybody to come back and do the job again, and then they lay you off in 5 more years. And it's been very cyclical with this kind of training department, right? So this way we can be not a person that's on payroll, but go in, give them the information they need, come back out and wait for the call to come back. And I think that you're going to start to see more and more companies, especially companies that are struggling right now. A lot of guys leaving the industry. Now we've got guys running and in these positions that maybe haven't even been running a truck for very long. And now they're running whole departments of trucks and don't really know what they don't know. So I think it's a great way for us to help the industry to be profitable and help the industry to grow and help the industry to be safe.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And man, you crush it. I love it. So there's a couple things. So provincial carriers that may be listening, or maybe they read something, even though there's no regulatory requirement at this point for an ELD, the cost savings of an ELD. I actually did an episode on the cost savings of automation. But if you look at, say, you have 10 drivers and they're buying those cheap little books, and the cost of that over a course of a year versus the cost of an ELD, plus a couple of things, obviously benefits of an ELD, the cost savings alone, then you go to driver retention standpoint. Sure, yes, when you go with Pioneer, there's support, there's technical support, there's coaching, there's mentoring, this is how you do it. It's constant, it's in your face. So that way change management actually happens naturally instead of there's no force. And when that change management happens and professional drivers feel like professionals, that's called retention. So from a provincial carrier standpoint, that's just one small blip. And I know we could talk about that as another even episode, which I'd be totally down to do, because it's like, no. There's so many wins when you integrate the right technologies with the right partners. And I highly, highly recommend Pioneer. Going back to the training part, you're absolutely right, where far too often people think, oh, it costs money. And I'm like, okay, so let's look at the cost. What does the cost of hours of service is a perfect example. It's just like if someone fell asleep at the wheel and you don't have an hours of service policy, what do you think your insurance company is going to say if you're getting sued for X? They're going to say, prove to me that you were not, or that you were in compliance. Prove it. And you're going to say, they have a class 1, they should know hours of service. It's like, no. So there's so many value adds, Dallas, what you just broke down, where like I could go on the preachy part and just really force feed this, like, okay, there's so many reasons to protect yourself, but that's maybe a negative way to think about it. So let's think of the progression side of it with what you're doing. And I highly recommend that carriers, professional drivers, if you're listening, encourage your carriers to reach out to Dallas too, because ultimately we all want to work. I remember when I was driving, I loved being in an environment where I felt safe. I felt like I was listened to. If someone's like, you got to take that piece of equipment, I'm like, man, that thing's like 10,000 pounds too heavy. They'll actually listen. Like, but it takes, again, someone like yourself, an expert, to come in and say, well, this is what you can legally do with this setup. So highly recommend that. So if I'm a carrier right now listening, if I'm a supplier in industry listening right now, or a professional driver, and they have questions about ELDs, they have questions obviously about melt training, or they have questions about getting you and your team at Pioneer in to do training, what's the best way that people can contact you for that?
If they just go to our website, pioneersolutions.com, and have a look, we got a new website up and running. It looks really awesome. So there's a good way to get a hold of us there. There's a number there. If they want to chat with me, I'm local here in Medicine Hat, 403-581-9173. Give me a shout, give me a text message. Love to sit down and chat with anybody that wants to talk about it, even if it's looking like it's irrelevant, but maybe they have questions. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it be training, whether it be just thoughts on some different perspective of what's kind of coming and how to be ready or what they could do. I'm more than happy to sit down with those guys and see what we can do and what we can put together for them. So absolutely.
And I'll make sure to include that in the show notes too, because I think that's really important. It's nice to have a conversation, but it's always nice to know, wait, well, how can I have more conversations, and how can I do business with this guy, and how can you come solve my problem? So I think that's really important. But just, as we do come to an end, first off, I'm super grateful, man. Like the amount of depth and information and passion that you shared, like, and watching you, I'm just like you probably see me, like I'm getting busy because I'm like, keep going. So I really appreciate that. But just as we do come to an end, were there any final thoughts that you wanted to share in today's episode?
Well, I just want to encourage anybody that's out there that's interested or just wants to have a discussion, reach out to us, because it could be just a simple conversation and we can set you in the right direction. And don't be afraid to contact us, because we all love to chat about it. And I don't think you'll find anybody at Pioneer that will give you really truly a different answer, but the perspectives that we have from the whole entire group is so broad, and we're all on the same page. And so it doesn't matter. We can help you.
Awesome. Okay, Dallas, honestly, buddy, thank you so much. And like I said, I guess I get stoked. Like I have to tell myself to stop shaking my head in agreement because I'm like, yes, keep going. So appreciate though, man. You are really honest, and I really admire, like, again, I learned more about you today than I have so far, but I really admire your history and your experience in the industry. And I'm really grateful also that you're willing to really lay it out there for students, because I just remember my time when I was a trainee, I'm like, that's it. Like, because I didn't go through MELT, and I was just like, okay. So seeing your passion to teach the whys, I think is really, really good, and our industry needs it. So keep rocking, man. But thank you so much again for hopping on. This was awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. Okay, have a wonderful day. See ya. Dallas, honestly, thank you so much for all the value that you shared in today's conversation. I'm super encouraged by your journey, and for the fact that your years of experience and understand the why things occur is really helping you as you train new drivers, but more so, you're really helping to create a safer transportation industry. So I really encourage you to connect with Dallas either on LinkedIn or directly on their website, pioneersafetysolutions.com, to learn more about doing business with them. I've also, of course, included the links in the show notes. So Dallas, thank you so much again, man. Really appreciate just the energy that you brought today and the level of expertise that you're able to share. It really does mean a lot. So before you leave, I do ask that you subscribe to the channel that you're listening on, like the episode, but share it out. More people need to hear exactly what Dallas was sharing in this conversation, where there is so many opportunities in the transportation industry to be successful. But just because you obtain your driver's license doesn't mean that the need to be trained stops. So that's from a driver's perspective, but also a carrier's perspective. And honestly, carriers that are listening right now, first off, shout out to yourselves. Super grateful for what you do for our industry. Don't lose the fact, or don't forget the fact that we always need to continue to evolve and grow. So that can be through technology, through advanced training like Dallas offers, and so much more. So highly recommend that you connect with the team at Pioneer Safety Solutions. As always, let's create a pivotal impact. Bye.